The story of Westeros didn't begin with a king on a throne. It began with something far older, far colder, and far more patient than any human dynasty. Everything you know, the wars, the weddings, the betrayals, the dragons, all of it was just an echo of something that happened long before anyone thought to write it down. If you leave now, you'll miss where it all truly starts. And once you know the real beginning, nothing in the story looks the same again. So settle in, get comfortable. We're going back to the very start. Before there were 7 kingdoms, there was just one continent, and it had no name that anyone remembers. The land that would eventually be called Westeros was old in ways that defy easy understanding. Its mountains had been worn down by millions of years of wind. Its rivers had carved their paths through rock over timescales that make human history feel like a single afternoon. The first people to call it home were the children of the forest. Think about that name for a moment. The children. It suggests something small, something fragile. And in some ways they were. They were short, slight beings, not much taller than human children even when fully grown. They had large golden or green eyes that could see in the dark. They lived among the trees, carved faces into the weirwoods, and spoke a language that sounded like the wind moving through leaves. But they were not fragile in the ways that mattered. The children of the forest had something called the green sight, the ability to see through time, to dream of things that had not yet happened, to connect their minds to animals and trees and the web of life itself. They worshipped nameless nature gods, the old gods, and the weirwood trees were their temples. Their eyes carved into the pale bark, watching everything, always, in every direction at once. They had no cities, no castles, no iron. They didn't need them. For thousands of years, the children lived in this continent alone, alongside the giants, alongside the animals, alongside the deep ancient magic that ran through the land like a current through water. This was the Dawn Age, and it was, by most accounts, peaceful in the way that wild things are peaceful. Not gentle exactly, but balanced. Then, roughly 12,000 years before the events of the story you already know, the first men arrived. They came from across a land bridge in the east, a narrow strip of land that once connected Westeros to the continent of Essos. They came with bronze weapons and leather shields and horses, and they brought with them a different relationship to the land entirely. The first men cut down forests. They cleared trees to plant fields. They carved their marks into the weirwoods, not reverently the way the children did, but casually, because the wood was useful. The children of the forest went to war. This was not a war like the wars that came later. There were no siege engines, no cavalry charges, no strategies drawn on maps in candlelit rooms. This was something older and stranger. The children used their magic to flood river crossings, to call down storms, to drive animals mad. They are said to have shattered the land bridge that the first men used to cross into Westeros, cracking the earth itself, letting the sea pour through, creating what is now called the Broken Arm of Dawn and the Waters of the Stepstones. Even that didn't stop the first men. There were simply too many of them. The war lasted for 2,000 years. 2,000 years of slow, grinding, bloody conflict. And then, gradually, it ended. Not with a decisive victory for either side, but with something rarer and more interesting. A peace. The Pact of the Isle of Faces, struck on a small island in the middle of a lake in what is now called the Riverlands. The first men agreed to stop cutting down the weirwood trees. The children agreed to share the land, and both sides marked the moment by carving faces into the weirwoods on that island, watching each other with those pale carved eyes. This peace held. For 4,000 years it held. The first men gradually adopted the old gods. They built their own weirwood groves. They began to leave behind bronze and learn iron. They built the first rough halls and holdfasts that would eventually grow into the keeps and castles of the later age. And in doing so, they became Westerosi. Not invaders anymore. Something rooted. But here's what nobody talks about when they tell this story. The peace was real. The coexistence was genuine. And that made what came next so much worse, because it didn't come from the conflict between men and children. It came from somewhere else entirely. Something neither of them had created and neither of them fully understood. It came from the Long Night, roughly 8,000 years before the time of the story. And here we have to say roughly, because the records from this era are fragments and legends and things whispered by maesters who barely believed them themselves. The world went cold. Not cold like a harsh winter, cold like something fundamental had changed. The sun retreated, the darkness stretched, crops failed, animals migrated south and then disappeared, rivers froze solid and stayed frozen. And out of the darkness from the north came creatures that had never been seen before, the White Walkers. In the old tongue, they were called the Others. That word says something, doesn't it? Not the monsters, not the dead, just others. Something categorically different from everything that had come before. Something that didn't fit into any existing understanding of the world. They walked through the cold they brought with them. They carried weapons made of ice that shattered steel on contact. They raised the dead, animals, humans, anyone who fell before them, into whites, shambling undead soldiers with blue eyes and no will of their own. And they moved south through Westeros, killing everything in their path. Here's what we know about where they came from, and it changes everything. The children of the forest made them. This is the revelation that lands quietly, but never really leaves. Thousands of years earlier, during those endless wars with the first men, the children of the forest took a human man. Some accounts say a prisoner, some say a volunteer. No one knows for certain. And they pressed a dragon glass blade into his chest, into his heart, and they transformed him. They created the first White Walker as a weapon of war, a thing of pure cold and death to use against the warm-blooded invaders who were destroying their world. They created something they could not control. The weapon turned on everyone. The Long Night lasted a generation. Think about that. An entire generation of humans and children living in permanent darkness, permanent cold, permanent fear. Children were born into the dark who never saw the sun until they were adults, if they survived that long. Civilizations that had taken thousands of years to build were scoured away. The population of Westeros was reduced to a fraction of what it had been, and everywhere, at the edges of the firelight, the dead were walking. The hero of this age, if there was one, is remembered only as Azor Ahai, or perhaps as the last hero. The legends blur here, and different cultures tell it differently, but the shape of the story is consistent. A single figure, armed with a special weapon, led humanity's fight back against the darkness. In some versions, the weapon was a sword called Lightbringer, forged by plunging it into the heart of someone the hero loved. In other versions, the hero ventured north with a small band of companions, all of whom died, to seek help from the children of the forest themselves. What is clear is that the long night ended. The White Walkers were driven back. The cold retreated and the sun returned, and the survivors emerged from their caves and their forts and their makeshift shelters into a world that had been fundamentally changed. And in the aftermath of that horror, two things were built that would define the next 8,000 years. The first was the wall, 700 feet of ice, nearly 300 miles wide, stretching from the shivering sea in the east to the Bay of Ice in the west, cutting Westeros completely in half. It was built by a figure called Bran the Builder, the first of House Stark, the man who would also build Winterfell, using methods that were never fully understood afterward. Magic was involved. The wall was not just ice, it was warded. Something in its construction repelled the White Walkers, held them beyond it, kept them from crossing. And to man the wall, an order was created, the Night's Watch. Men who would stand forever at the edge of the world, watching the darkness, wearing black, giving up their names and their families and their futures to stand guard against the thing that everyone in the warm South would slowly, over the next 8,000 years, begin to forget. The second thing, built in the aftermath of the Long Night, was a dynasty. The Starks became the kings of winter in the north, and the principle at the heart of their house, winter is coming, was never supposed to be a metaphor. It was a memory, a warning kept alive by people who had survived the worst winter the world had ever known and understood, in their bones that it could always come again. The Age of Heroes followed the Long Night. This is the era of legends, the time when the great houses trace their origins, when the stories are half myth and half history and impossible to fully separate. This is when Lan the Clever allegedly tricked the Casterlys out of their golden rock by the sea, the same rock that would become Casterly Rock, seat of House Lannister. The story is almost certainly embellished. Lan the Clever probably wasn't a single magical trickster who swindled an entire family out of their home through cunning alone. But the kernel of truth is that the Lannisters have been in the Westerlands for as long as anyone can remember, and gold has always run through everything they are. This is when Garth Greenhand walked the Reach, planting crops and founding families, the mythological ancestor of House Tyrell and half the noble houses of the South. Whether or not he was a real person, the story he represents is real. The slow settlement and cultivation of the most fertile land in Westeros, the building of a civilization rooted in abundance rather than survival. This is when the Hightowers built their tower at the mouth of the Whispering Sound, the same tower that still stands in Old Town thousands of years later, when the Storm Kings of House Durrandon began their long rule of the Stormlands, when the Greyjoys and their ancestors first made the Iron Islands their salt and iron home. For thousands of years, Westeros evolved. Kingdoms rose and hardened. The first men who had once been invaders became the native population. Their descendants built the culture that the story inherits, the respect for oaths, the tradition of the weirwood, the understanding that the world is dangerous and the only thing between a man and oblivion is the loyalty of those beside him. Then, roughly 6,000 years before the events of the main story, something arrived from the east that would change everything again. The Andals. They came in ships across the narrow sea, men and women, with iron weapons and a new religion, the faith of the Seven, a god with 7 faces, 7 aspects, 7 expressions of a single divine being. They had a symbol burned or carved into their chests, a 7-pointed star. And they came not to trade or to settle peacefully alongside the existing population. They came to conquer. The Andal invasion was not a single campaign. It was wave after wave after wave, over hundreds of years. They crossed the narrow sea and landed in the Vale first, in what is still remembered as the Fingers, those rocky peninsulas jutting into the water. And they moved inland with their iron swords and their new god. The first men fought back. In some places they held for generations, but iron beats bronze in ways that matter, sharper, stronger, more durable, and the Andals had it in abundance. One by one, the kingdoms of the first men fell. The Storm Kings fell. The old royal houses of the Riverlands fell. The Rock fell. The Andals pushed north and north and north, until they reached the Neck, that narrow, swampy strip of land connecting the north to the rest of Westeros. And there, they stopped. The north held. Not because the Andals lacked the will to push further, but because the Neck is a nightmare to move an army through. And the Northerners who defended it were fierce and determined, and the Starks and their bannermen bled the Andal advance dry at the marshes. The result was that Westeros became a divided continent in a way that persists even into the main story. South of the Neck, the culture is predominantly Andal, the faith of the Seven, a tradition of chivalry and knighthood, a more southern way of thinking about loyalty and hierarchy. North of the Neck, the culture stayed First Men, the old gods, the weirwoods, a more austere and direct way of relating to the world. No knights in the proper Andal sense, no seps, just the trees and the cold and the memory of what winter really means. The Andals also could not conquer the Iron Islands, where the culture of the Ironborn was simply too brutal and too waterborne for any mainland invasion to dislodge. And they couldn't reach Dawn, where the Rhoynar had not yet arrived, but where the native population would prove equally resistant. So by roughly 4,000 years before the main story, the cultural map of Westeros had taken roughly the shape it would hold. And the continent settled into a long, complicated era of wars between its many kingdoms. The Vale fighting the Riverlands, the Westerlands fighting everyone, the Reach growing rich and powerful, the North cold and self-contained, the Iron Islands raiding whenever they could, the Stormlands holding their coast against everyone. And Dawn was its own story entirely. Before we get to the Conquest, though, one more piece of the world needs to exist in your mind. Because the Targaryens did not come from nothing. They came from the greatest civilization the world had ever known, and understanding what that civilization was, and why it no longer exists, is essential to understanding everything the Targaryens did, and why they did it. Old Valyria. Imagine a peninsula on the eastern continent, volcanic, geologically unstable, crisscrossed with rivers of lava and steam. The Valyrians were, at their beginning, a simple people, shepherds and farmers on the Valyrian Freehold. Then they found dragons in the volcanic caves of the 14 Flames, the chain of volcanoes that dominated their homeland. And they learned to control them. How they learned is lost. The dragon lore of Valyria, the specific methods, the blood magic, the language of command, was deliberately guarded and has not survived in any form outside of fragments. What is known is that the Valyrians bound dragon riders to specific dragons through blood, and that the bond could only be formed by those of Valyrian blood. This created a ruling caste of dragon lords, a small number of noble families who controlled the dragons, and through them, the world. Valyria expanded across the eastern continent for thousands of years. It built roads that still stand today, roads so well constructed that centuries of neglect haven't destroyed them. It built aqueducts and towers. It created Valyrian steel through a process involving dragonfire and spells together, a metal of extraordinary quality that held its edge forever and could be worked in ways ordinary steel couldn't. Valyrian steel is rare in the main story because Valyria is gone and nobody knows how to make it anymore. The Valyrian Freehold conquered city after city, people after people, built an empire that at its height stretched from the Jade Sea to the shores of Essos nearest Westeros. It was not a gentle empire. The Valyrians used slave labor on an enormous scale. The mines beneath the 14 Flames were worked by slaves in conditions of organized brutality. Entire peoples were absorbed, subjugated, put to work. The Rhoynar were one such people, or tried to be, until Nymeria's mass evacuation saved them by removing them from the continent entirely. Others were not so fortunate. And then, 400 years before the main story, in a single day, it ended. The doom of Valyria. The 14 Flames erupted simultaneously. The sky went dark. The earth cracked. The peninsula collapsed into the sea, and the sea swallowed what remained. In a single day, the greatest empire in the history of the known world was reduced to ruins and smoking water. Every Dragonlord family was killed. The dragons were killed. The knowledge was destroyed. Nobody knows why. The Maesters have theories that the Valyrians' own magical experiments destabilized the volcanoes, that they pushed too far in their blood magic and something broke. There are whispers that it was not an accident, that it was done. By whom or what is never stated clearly. The Targaryens escaped. 12 years before the Doom, they relocated from Valyria to Dragonstone, their small island fortress off the coast of Westeros. They brought with them their dragons, their eggs, their accumulated wealth, their family. They were considered eccentric for this retreat at the time. After the Doom, they were considered prescient or lucky. The distinction mattered less than the result. For 40 years after the Doom, the Targaryens sat at Dragonstone, watched the world process the shock of Valyria's absence, watched the former territories of the Freehold descend into the wars of succession and fragmentation that produced the free cities. And then Aegon looked west. 300 years before the story begins, everything changed again. Aegon Targaryen landed at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, with his 2 sisters, 3 dragons, and roughly 1,500 soldiers. That was it. 1,500 men. Against the combined populations and armies of 7 kingdoms, it should have been a footnote, a failed invasion by an overconfident lord from an island fortress across the narrow sea. But Aegon had dragons, and not just any dragons. He had Balerion the Black Dread, the largest dragon the world had seen since the fall of old Valyria, a creature so vast that his shadow could swallow a town whole. He had Meraxes, ridden by his sister wife Rhaenys. He had Vargar, ridden by his other sister wife Visenya. The concept of the Conquest is so central to everything that follows that it's worth sitting with for a moment. Think about what Aegon was. He was the heir of a Valyrian noble house that had evacuated its home 40 years before the Doom of Valyria, that cataclysmic event that destroyed the greatest civilization the world had ever known in a single day of volcanic fire and earthquake. The Targaryens alone among the great Dragonlord families had left before the Doom, settled on a small island called Dragonstone, and survived. Whether Aegon's ancestors foresaw the Doom or simply got lucky is one of the great unresolved questions of Westerosi history. The Maesters argue it. The small folk tell stories about it. The Targaryens themselves maintained an air of mysterious certainty that they had always known. What is certain is that Aegon arrived in Westeros with the last dragons in the known world, and he intended to rule it. His first great battle was the Field of Fire. The combined armies of the Reach and the Rock, House Tyrell and House Lannister marching together, tens of thousands of men, met Aegon's much smaller force. It should have been no contest. In terms of soldiers, the alliance outnumbered Aegon's forces by more than 10 to 1. All 3 dragons flew that day, and the field of battle became a field of fire. 4,000 men burned alive. Thousands more were wounded. The combined army broke and fled. The Reach and the Rock surrendered. One by one, the kingdoms fell or bent the knee. The King of the Rock rode out to submit in person. Highgarden's lord chose submission over destruction. The Stormlands fell. The Riverlands, which had been under the brutal occupation of the Ironborn, actually welcomed Aegon as a liberator. The Vale, ruled by the Arryns, chose not to fight and negotiated terms. The Ironborn submitted after some resistance. The North was different, and here is where Aegon showed something beyond simple conquest. When King Torrhen Stark rode south with his army, his maesters calculated the odds, looked at what the dragons had already done, and counselled submission. Torrhen knelt. He surrendered the crown of the Kings of Winter. He became the Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North. He is remembered in history as the King who knelt, a title that contains both derision and, if you look at it clearly, a kind of cold intelligence. He kept his people alive. Only Dorne refused to submit. Dorne fought back, and the war against Dorne became the great shadow over the early Targaryen reign. Dorne was different from every other kingdom in Westeros, and the reasons went back centuries. 3,000 years before Aegon's conquest, the Rhoynar, a people from the rivers of Essos, masters of water magic, builders of great cities along the Rhoyne, were destroyed by the Valyrian Freehold. The Valyrian dragon lords came upriver with their dragons and burned city after city. The Rhoynar queen, Nymeria, loaded 10,000 ships with her surviving people and fled across the narrow sea. She landed in Dorne. She allied with a local lord named Mors Martell. She married him. And the culture she brought merged with the culture of the first men already there, creating something unique in Westeros. Dornish inheritance was gender blind. The oldest child inherited, regardless of whether they were a son or daughter. Dornish attitudes toward love and sexuality were more open than anywhere else on the continent. And the Dornish had a particular relationship to warfare. They didn't fight pitched battles. They retreated into their deserts and their mountains, let invading armies exhaust themselves against the terrain, and simply waited. Aegon tried to take Dorne with his dragons. He failed. His sister wife, Rhaenys, was killed there. Her dragon Meraxes shot from the sky by a great scorpion bolt and brought down into enemy territory. What happened to Rhaenys afterward was never confirmed officially, but the stories were dark enough that Aegon broke his own principle of measured rule and became, briefly, a king consumed by grief and rage. He burned Dornish castles from the air for years. The Dornish assassinated members of his court. His surviving sister wife, Visenya, survived a knife attack in King's Landing itself. The conflict with Dorne would outlast Aegon entirely. It would persist through generations of Targaryen rule, grinding down the dynasty's strength and resources and patience for over a century before a peace was finally negotiated. Not through conquest, but through marriage. But that is ahead of us. Let's stay with Aegon a moment longer. After the conquest, Aegon did something that reveals the kind of ruler he was trying to be. He built a new capital city, not at Dragonstone, his family's island fortress. not at any of the existing great cities of the conquered kingdoms. He built it at the place where he had first landed, at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, at the foot of a hill. The hill was called Aegon's High Hill, and at its peak he raised a castle of fused stone, built by dragonfire, black and smoking and strange. He called it the Red Keep. The city that grew around it he called King's Landing. It was a statement. The capital of the Seven Kingdoms would be a new thing, not built on any kingdom's existing foundation. And the throne at the center of that castle was made of the swords surrendered by his enemies. 1,000 blades melted and fused together by Balerian's fire into a twisted, uncomfortable seat of jagged metal, the Iron Throne. Designed, some said, to remind the king, always, that the seat of power should draw blood if you sat in it wrong. That ruling was supposed to be uncomfortable. Aegon ruled for 37 years after the Conquest. They were years of consolidation, of building the institutions that would govern the realm, the small council, the system of lords and bannermen, the legal framework that would persist for centuries. He was not a perfect king, but he was a builder. He understood that conquest is easy compared to governance, and he devoted the long middle portion of his reign to the harder work. He died quietly, in his bed at Dragonstone. He was 64 years old. Valyrian the Black Dread outlived him by decades. What followed Aegon's death was not a clean succession. It rarely is. His son, Aenys, inherited, a gentle and artistic man who loved dragon riding and poetry, and was psychologically unsuited to the brutal political realities of ruling a freshly conquered realm. The faith of the Seven, the dominant religion of the South, had accepted Aegon's rule partly because he had been pragmatic, and partly because he had 3 dragons and nobody wanted to test that. But Aenys made the mistake of having his son marry his daughter, following Targaryen tradition from Valyria, where incestuous marriage among dragon lords had been common. And the faith erupted. The High Septon denounced the marriage as abomination. The faith militant, the armed wing of the church, rose up. They occupied the starry sept of Old Town and sept after sept across the realm, and Aenys didn't have the stomach to crush them. His half-brother did. When Aenys died, broken, some said, by the weight of his failures, his half-brother Maegor took the throne. He is remembered as Maegor the Cruel, and the name is entirely deserved. Maegor crushed the faith militant with a ferocity that was genuinely shocking, even by the standards of an era not known for gentleness. He slaughtered septons and warriors alike. He burned, he tortured. He made the faith's resistance so brutally costly that they eventually capitulated. He also killed his own family when they threatened him, executed his nephew's supporters, put multiple wives through a gauntlet of succession attempts, several of whom died, some in childbirth, some under circumstances that were never clearly explained. Maegor the Cruel sat the Iron Throne for 6 years, and then one morning his guards found him dead on the throne itself. His wrists were cut, whether by his own hands or someone else's was never determined. He had no heir. He left behind a realm exhausted by his cruelty and grateful to be done with him. The throne passed to his nephew Jaehaerys, and here is where the Targaryen dynasty finds its highest point. Jaehaerys the Conciliator, the Old King. He ruled for 55 years, longer than any Targaryen before or after him. He was a genuine statesman, a man who combined the political instincts his family often lacked with a long view of governance that is rare in any era. He negotiated the permanent peace with the faith, ending the threat of the faith militant for generations. He built the great network of roads that connected the Seven Kingdoms. The Gold Roads, the Rose Roads, the roads that allowed armies and merchants and pilgrims to move across the continent in ways that hadn't been possible before. He standardized weights and measures, revised the legal codes, built the Maester's chain of communication between castles. He was also helped enormously by his wife, Queen Alysanne. She was his partner in the truest sense. She flew on her dragon's silver wing to every corner of the realm, listening to people, understanding their problems, bringing those problems back to Jaehaerys. It was Alysanne who pushed for the expansion of the Night's Watch's lands, hearing from the Watch that the wildlings were pressing hard and the existing grants weren't sufficient. She advocated for the gift, the lands south of the Wall, donated to the Watch for their support. Jaehaerys granted it. Alysanne and Jaehaerys lost children, several of them. The grief of losing heirs was a constant dark thread through even the best years of the reign, and the question of succession, which child would follow them, which bloodline would continue, was never simple. Their children died or were disinherited or died young, one after another, and the question of who came next haunted Jaehaerys' final years. He convened a great council to resolve it. At Harrenhal, 100 lords of the realm gathered to decide the succession by collective judgment. Two main claimants stood before them: Viserys, grandson of Jaehaerys through his son Balon, and Laenor Velaryon, grandson through Jaehaerys' daughter Rhaenys. The council chose Viserys. They chose the male line claim over the female line claim. That decision, made once by that council at that moment, would echo forward into catastrophe. Jaehaerys died 2 years later, in 103 AC. Viserys took the throne, and the long stability of the conciliator's reign gave way to something more turbulent. Viserys I was not a bad man. He was, if anything, too kind for the position. He genuinely wanted peace. He genuinely loved his family. And those qualities in a king who had to make hard choices and stand by them translated into a reign of mounting instability. His first wife, Aemma Arryn, died in childbirth. Her and the son she was trying to deliver both lost in one terrible night. He had one surviving child, a daughter named Rhaenyra, and he named her his heir. Publicly, formally, called her the Princess of Dragonstone and made his lords swear to support her succession. Then he remarried. Alicent Hightower, daughter of his Hand of the King. She was young, she was intelligent, and she gave Viserys sons: Aegon, Aemond, Daeron. Sons who, under the tradition established at the Great Council, would normally stand ahead of any daughter in the succession. This was the fault line that split the realm. Rhaenyra's claim versus Aegon's claim. Viserys insisted on Rhaenyra. The Hightowers, through Alicent, pushed for Aegon. The court divided into two factions: the Blacks, who wore Rhaenyra's colours and supported her claim, and the Greens, who wore Alicent's colours and backed Aegon. The specific details of how the tensions escalated, the incidents between the children, the lost eye, the whispered slanders and counter-slanders, the marriages and alliances drawn along factional lines. Those are the story of House of the Dragon, a story worth telling on its own at greater length. What matters for the overall timeline is the consequence. When Viserys died in 129 AC, the realm went to war with itself. The Dance of the Dragons, a civil war between two branches of House Targaryen, each with dragons, each with a legitimate claim, each with lords who had reasons to support them that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with their own advancement. The war lasted roughly 2 years, and it was catastrophic. Dragon fought dragon in the skies above Westeros for the first time in living memory. The great beasts died one by one, fought each other, were brought down by scorpions, were killed on the ground, were poisoned. In a single battle called the Battle Above the God's Eye, 4 dragons died. In the storming of the dragon pit in King's Landing, a mob of small folk killed several more. By the time the war ended, almost all the dragons were gone. Rhaenyra held King's Landing briefly and lost it. She was killed by her half-brother's dragon, fed to sunfire, piece by piece, in one of the darkest moments in Westerosi history. Her son, Aegon III, eventually took the throne and the war ended. Aegon III was called the Dragonbane, not because he hated dragons, but because he had seen his mother killed by one and could never bring himself to bond with the last surviving dragons of his line. They died during his reign, not in battle, but from sickness and neglect, growing smaller with each generation, until the last one was the size of a cat and dated in the dragon pit. The Targaryen dragons were extinct. The Targaryens would rule without dragons for the next 150 years. Without dragons, they were just another noble family, still with the name, still with the symbolic weight of the conquest, still sitting the Iron Throne, but mortal in a way they hadn't been before, vulnerable. The century and a half that followed the dance is not without its stories. There was the reign of Aegon IV, the unworthy, whose deathbed act of legitimizing all his bastards by a dozen different women was essentially a time bomb planted under the dynasty, an act of careless malice that would eventually blow apart the realm. There was Daenerys I, the young dragon, who finally conquered Dawn at enormous cost, in blood and gold and lives, and then lost it almost immediately. There was Daenerys II, who brought Dawn peacefully into the realm through marriage, achieved the thing his ancestor had failed to achieve, and was perhaps the most underappreciated king the Targaryens ever produced. And there was the Blackfyre rebellion, the first of them. Demon Blackfyre was the legitimized bastard of Aegon the Unworthy, the best of them, a warrior of extraordinary ability, charismatic, beloved by the commons, given the Valyrian steel sword Blackfyre, which had belonged to Aegon the Conqueror himself by his father. And there were those who believed Daemon was more king than Daeron, that the legitimization had made him the true heir, that the sword itself was a sign. The rebellion failed. Daemon died at the Battle of the Redgrass Field, killed by arrows. But the Blackfyre cause didn't die with him. His sons and grandsons kept trying, exiling to the free cities and returning, attempting coup after coup, supported by lords who had reasons to prefer instability. The Blackfyre rebellion stretched across generations, popping back up every few decades, draining Targaryen legitimacy with each one. The last of the Blackfyres died before the main story begins, but the damage was done. The Targaryens had ruled for over a century and a half without dragons, and each rebellion, each succession crisis, each terrible king, or weak king, or mad king, had eroded the aura of inevitability that had made the conquest possible in the first place. 91 years before the main story, a king named Aegon V sat the Iron Throne. He is known to history as Aegon the Unlikely, because he was the fourth son of a fourth son and had almost no chance of ever becoming king through normal succession. He was fostered as a young boy with a hedge knight named Sir Duncan the Tall, travelling the roads of Westeros, seeing how the small folk actually lived, learning what poverty looked like from the inside. It shaped him. He became a king, genuinely concerned with the welfare of the common people, in ways that most kings of his era were not. He died at Summerhall. The tragedy of Summerhall is one of those events that hangs over the main story. like a shadow you can't quite see the source of. Aegon the Unlikely became obsessed in his later years with hatching dragon eggs, with restoring the Targaryen dragons that had been gone for a century and a half. At the Palace of Summerhall in the Stormlands, in 259 AC, something went catastrophically wrong. A fire, an explosion. The palace burned. Aegon V died. His son and heir died. The Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Sir Duncan the Tall, the hedge knight who had once been Aegon's guardian and closest friend, died. What happened at Summerhall is one of the great mysteries of recent Westerosi history. There are no surviving records. The only things that emerged from the fire were a grieving young prince named Jaehaerys, who would become the next king, and a baby born in the smoke and fire on the day of the tragedy. That baby was named Rhaegar, and one dragon egg, some say, cracked open in the heat. Nothing hatched, or nothing hatched that survived. The reign of Aerys II is where the story you know begins to take shape. Aerys Targaryen, the Mad King. He did not begin as mad. He was, in his youth, charming, intelligent, ambitious. His best friend was Tywin Lannister, son of a Lannister lord who became his Hand of the King, and through sheer competence made Aerys's reign more successful than it had any right to be. They were brilliant together, this king and his hand, and the early years of Aerys's reign were genuinely prosperous. But Aerys had something wrong with him, something that might have been latent from the beginning, something that might have been triggered by trauma. He was once captured by the Lord of Duskendale, held prisoner for months in genuinely horrible conditions before Sir Barristan Selmy rescued him. After that, he was never fully himself again. The paranoia deepened. The cruelty surfaced. He became fixated on fire, on dragonfire specifically, on recreating the ancient power of his ancestors. He burned people, lords who crossed him, lords who didn't cross him but who he became convinced had. He burned them with wildfire, that unstable, alchemical green fire that burns hotter than ordinary flame and cannot be quenched with water. And as each burning reduced the men around him to silence and submission, his belief in his own power grew and his grip on reality loosened. Tywin Lannister resigned as Hand of the King, eventually, unable to watch anymore, retreating to Casterly Rock with his wounded pride and his accumulating resentments. And Aerys got worse without Tywin's steady hand constraining him. Then came the tournament at Harrenhal in 281 AC. A great tournament, the largest in a generation, hosted by the Wents of Harrenhal. And at this tournament, the Crown Prince Rhaegar Targaryen did something that set in motion the events that would destroy his dynasty. He won the tournament. He was the finest jouster of the day, unhorsing competitor after competitor. And when it came time to crown the Queen of Love and Beauty, the traditional honor given by the champion to the lady of his choice, always his own wife or betrothed, Rhaegar rode past his wife, Elia Martell of Dorne, and crowned Lyanna Stark, daughter of the Lord of Winterfell, betrothed to Robert Baratheon, sister of Ned Stark. That moment, that single moment of a crown of winter roses placed on a young Northwoman's head, the silence that followed, the realm holding its breath. What happened next is still in the main story, presented partly as mystery, what we know or what can be pieced together. Rhaegar came to Lyanna afterward. They met, they talked, they made a decision together. Some say he kidnapped her, some say she went willingly. The truth, which the story eventually reveals, is that they fell in love, that Lyanna was not being held prisoner, but was in hiding with Rhaegar, while he annulled his marriage to Elia and secretly married her, that they had a child together, a boy named Aegon, who would be given the name Jon. But none of that was known at the time. What was known was that Lyanna Stark was gone, and her father and elder brother went to King's Landing to demand her return. Aerys burned them. Brandon Stark, Lyanna's brother, was killed first, strung up in a device designed to make him strangle himself as he struggled to reach the sword just out of reach. His father, Rickard Stark, came to demand justice, and Aerys burned him alive, roasting him in his own armor, while Brandon choked to death trying to save him. Then, Aerys sent to Jon Arryn, Lord of the Eyrie, demanding the heads of his two wards, Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon. And Jon Arryn, who had raised these boys as his own, refused. He called his banners. Robert called his banners. Ned called the North's banners. The great houses of the Vale, the Stormlands, and the North went to war against the Mad King, Robert's rebellion, or the War of the Usurper, depending on whose side you were on. It lasted roughly a year. It was brutal and fast. Robert Baratheon was the rebellion's hammer, a man of enormous physical presence and genuine battlefield brilliance, at his best in those months of war in ways he would never quite replicate afterward. He won at Summerhall, fighting 3 Targaryen loyalist forces in a single day. He won at Ashford, and then at the Battle of the Bells at Stony Sept, with Ned Stark's forces arriving just in time to save him from a Targaryen army. The rebellion found its decisive momentum. The turning point was the Trident. Robert and Rhaegar met in single combat in the middle of the river. The Crown Prince and the Rebel Lord, 2 of the finest warriors in the realm. Robert's warhammer against Rhaegar's speed. Rhaegar was winning, some accounts say, when Robert got inside his reach and drove the hammer home into his chest, crushing the rubies from his armor into the water. Rhaegar Targaryen died in the Trident. The dynasty died with him in practical terms. What came after moved fast. Tywin Lannister, who had stayed neutral through the entire war, marched his army to King's Landing under the pretext of supporting the crown. The gates opened, either out of gratitude or naivete, or some combination of both, and Tywin's forces sacked the city. Aerys, at the urging of a young knight of his Kingsguard named Jaime Lannister, had commissioned the pyromancers to cache wildfire throughout the city, beneath the streets, beneath the keeps, everywhere, intending to burn King's Landing to ash rather than let it be taken. Jaime Lannister killed him, drove his sword through the Mad King's back, then sat on the Iron Throne until Ned Stark arrived and found him there. A king's killer sitting on the throne, his white cloak soaked in blood, having just saved the lives of 500,000 people, in a way he could never explain without sounding like he was making excuses, because no one knew about the wildfire caches except the dead king and the man who killed him. Ned Stark never forgave him for it. Robert never fully understood why Ned was so troubled by it. Jaime Lannister carried the name Kingslayer for the rest of his life. Robert Baratheon took the throne. He married Cersei Lannister, Tywin's daughter, cementing the Lannister alliance, and the realm moved into a new era. But before we follow Robert to the throne, we have to follow Ned Stark south. Because in the final days of the rebellion, while Robert was moving toward King's Landing, Ned rode for the Tower of Joy. The Tower of Joy was a small holdfast in the Red Mountains of Dawn, and it was guarded by 3 members of the Kingsguard, not at King's Landing defending the king, not at Dragonstone protecting the heir, but here, in the middle of nowhere, guarding something the dying regime considered precious enough to warrant its finest defenders. Think about what that means for a moment. The regime was collapsing. King's Landing was being sacked. The throne was falling, and 3 of the best knights in the realm were standing guard at a tower in Dawn. They were not recalled. They did not leave. They stood their posts because their posts were not the king. Their posts were whoever was inside. Ned arrived with a small group of companions. A battle was fought. Almost everyone died, on both sides. Ned went inside the tower and found his sister, Lyanna, in a bed of blood. She had just given birth. She was dying, some complication of the birth, or injury, or simply the toll of what her body had been through. She took Ned's hand and whispered something to him. She made him promise something. He named the baby boy Jon. He took him back to Winterfell and told everyone the boy was his bastard son, born of an unnamed woman he had met during the war. He accepted the dishonor of that story, the damage it did to his reputation for perfect honor, the lifelong pain of watching his wife Catelyn regard this child with a coolness she couldn't hide. All of it to protect the boy, because the boy was not Ned's bastard. The boy was the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. He was trueborn, married under the faith. He was the heir to the Iron Throne, and Robert Baratheon, who had loved Lyanna with everything he had, who had started this war in her name, would have killed the child without a second's hesitation. Ned Stark kept that secret until the day he died. Robert's reign, 17 years of it. Robert Baratheon was a magnificent rebel and a disastrous king. He was built for war, for the physicality of it, the camaraderie, the clarity of enemies and friends. Governance bored him. Politics irritated him. The paperwork of running a realm was torture for a man whose instincts were all kinetic. He hunted, he drank, he ate. He filled King's Landing with his appetites and left the actual running of the kingdom to Tywin's daughter and eventually to Lord Jon Arryn. Cersei Lannister, the Queen. She had married Robert knowing she was a political asset being placed on the board by her father. She had hoped, maybe, for something more. For a husband who would look at her the way Tywin had never looked at anyone, with genuine respect. Robert's heart was always in the past, always with a dead girl in a Dornish tower. He was kind to Cersei in the early days, and then simply absent from her in every way that mattered. The relationship between Cersei and Jaime is one of the story's most deliberately uncomfortable threads, and it's worth understanding what it represented in the context of the world they came from. The Targaryens had practiced incest for generations as a way of keeping the dragon-riding bloodline concentrated. The Lannisters had absorbed something of the Targaryen influence at court over the years, and Cersei in particular had grown up watching a dynasty that didn't follow normal rules, that considered itself above the laws it imposed on everyone else. She and Jaime were twins, mirror images of each other, the two halves of what a single perfect Lannister might be. Jaime got the physical gifts, the beauty, the sword arm, the athletic grace. Cersei got the political mind, the ambition, the ability to read a room and see where all the knives were. Together, they were formidable. Separate, they were both somehow diminished. And their children were the proof and the consequence and the weapon. The children Cersei bore were not Robert's. They were Jaime's, her twin brother. This was the secret that held the entire structure of the realm's near future in its hands. Because if it came out, 3 children's legitimacy collapsed. The succession was void, and everything that happened in the name of those children's rights was built on nothing. Jon Arryn discovered it. The Lord of the Eyrie, the Hand of the King, the man who had started the rebellion by refusing to hand over Ned and Robert, spent his final months in King's Landing, looking at the royal children and comparing them to the known bastards of Robert Baratheon. Robert's bastards all had his look: black hair, blue eyes, the Baratheon colouring. Cersei's children were all golden, all Lannister. He died before he could bring this discovery to anyone useful. He died in suspicious circumstances, and the letter he had been writing to Ned Stark was sent anyway. And that letter, a letter about the seed being strong, was what started everything. When Robert rode north to Winterfell to ask Ned Stark to be his new Hand of the King, the story as most people know it begins. Ned didn't want to go. Winterfell was his. The North was his. He was not built for the South, for the court politics, the whispers, the layers of meaning under every polite conversation. He was a man of direct action and clear principle, living in a world that ran on indirection and flexible principle. He went anyway because Robert asked him, and Ned Stark did not refuse his king, and so the Stark family came south. Ned to serve as Hand, his daughters Sansa and Arya to be at court, to see the world, to make matches. Bran stayed behind at Winterfell until he didn't, until the thing that happened in the Broken Tower happened, and Bran fell, and Cersei and Jaime's secret suddenly had hands reaching for it from multiple directions. Ned found what Jon Arryn had found. He traced the Baratheon bloodlines, looked at the children, understood. He confronted Cersei directly, a decision that was simultaneously deeply principled and catastrophically naive. He told her he knew. He told her he was going to tell Robert. He gave her a chance to flee with her children before Robert returned from his hunting trip. Robert didn't come back from the hunting trip. He was gored by a boar, a hunting accident, but an accident that Cersei's party managed the circumstances of. The king's wound was fatal. The king was dying. And Ned was trying to arrange the transition of power to the rightful heir before Robert's breath stopped. He trusted Littlefinger, Peter Baelish, Lord of the Coin, Master of Coin on the Small Council, a man who had known the Stark and Tully families his whole life, who smiled and maneuvered and always was doing something for reasons 3 steps ahead of what was visible. Ned trusted him. He used Littlefinger to arrange the Gold Cloaks, the City Watch, to back his play when he moved against the Lannisters. The Gold Cloaks turned on him. Littlefinger's knife was at his throat, and Ned Stark, the most honourable man in the realm, was arrested for treason. What followed was brief and brutal. Joffrey Baratheon, Cersei's eldest son, the supposed heir, a boy of 13 with cruelty already calcified into his personality, sat the throne. He promised mercy if Ned confessed and yielded. Sansa pleaded with him, and Ned, looking at his daughter's face, looking at the way things were arranged, calculating that a false confession might keep him alive and protect his girls, confessed to treason he hadn't committed. Joffrey had him beheaded anyway, on the steps of the great Sept of Baelor, in front of the city, in front of Sansa, in front of everyone. Lord Eddard Stark of Winterfell, Warden of the North, Hand of the King, the most honourable man of his generation, kneeling on stone steps while Ilyn Payne raised the sword. The North exploded. Robb Stark was 17 years old when he called the banners. He was his father's son in every way, serious, principled, physically brave, and he had never fought a real battle in his life. But the North answered because they loved his father and because they were Northerners, and Northerners remember what loyalty means. They came down from their halls and their holdfasts, the Umbers and the Mormonts and the Karstarks and the Manderleys and all the rest, and they rode south under the direwolf banner of House Stark. The thing about Robb Stark that the history books would later miss is that he was genuinely gifted. not in the way his father was gifted. Ned was a man of bedrock principle and steady judgment. Robb had something more kinetic. He read terrain. He thought 3 moves ahead on a battlefield in ways that older and more experienced commanders couldn't quite follow until they saw it happen. The War of the 5 Kings. Multiple claimants to the throne fighting each other simultaneously while the realm bled. Robb Stark as king in the north, fighting for his father's justice and his family's freedom. Joffrey Baratheon on the Iron Throne, backed by the Lannisters. Stannis Baratheon at Dragonstone, Robert's eldest surviving brother, believing himself the rightful king now that the Lannister children's illegitimacy had become known to him. Renly Baratheon at Storm's End, Robert's younger, more charismatic brother, raising an enormous army behind the Tyrell alliance. Balon Greyjoy on the Iron Islands, seizing the chaos to declare independence and launch a new Iron Island campaign. 5 kings, 1 realm, and not enough throne for any of them. Robb Stark was brilliant in the field. He crossed the neck, divided his forces deceptively, sent his foot north to tie down Tywin Lannister's army, while his cavalry swept south and captured Jaime Lannister himself, the Kingslayer, Tywin's heir, taken prisoner in a single night's fighting. It was a strategic masterpiece. It should have been the foundation of a negotiated settlement. But the war didn't work that way. The kingdoms were too fractured, the actors too numerous, the loyalties too complicated. Renly was killed by a shadow, a creature of dark magic birthed by Melisandre the Red Priestess, the Shadowbinder who had attached herself to Stannis Baratheon and his claim. The shadow had Stannis's face, and it drove a blade into Renly's chest in his own tent before anyone could react. Renly's enormous army mostly went over to Stannis, and Stannis moved on King's Landing, the Battle of the Blackwater, Stannis's fleet burning in the harbour, Tyrion Lannister's wildfire gambit, the same green fire that Aerys had stored under the city, now deployed legitimately in a chain across the harbour, and ignited when Stannis' ships were in the water, burning the fleet, shattering the assault, saving the city. And then Tywin Lannister arriving at the last moment with the Tyrell alliance to finish the rout. Stannis retreated to Dragonstone. The Tyrells were now inside the Lannister power structure. In the north, the Greyjoys had taken Winterfell. Theon Greyjoy, Ned Stark's ward, a hostage kept for years as insurance against Balon Greyjoy's good behaviour, had defected from Robb's army and taken Winterfell with a small Ironborn force. He had faked the deaths of Bran and Rickon Stark to cover for their escape. The real children were alive, in the wilderness, moving north. Robb Stark made a fatal mistake. He had promised to marry a daughter of Walder Frey, the Lord of the Twins, the man who controlled the one reliable crossing of the Green Fork, and whose cooperation Robb had needed at the start of the war. He broke that promise and married Talisa Maega, a woman he loved. Walder Frey had been insulted once by a Tully and once by Robb Stark, and he did not forgive either. The Red Wedding. Robb came to the twins for his uncle Edmure Tully's wedding, a wedding that was also meant to mend the breach with the Freys. The Freys were to provide Edmure a wife and host the celebration. It should have been a reconciliation. The guest right, the ancient sacred law that said a host could not harm guests who had eaten his bread and salt, should have made it safe. Walder Frey had made an arrangement with Tywin Lannister and with Roose Bolton. The music changed. The Frey soldiers drew weapons. Robb's men were cut down in the Great Hall. Talisa was stabbed first, in the belly. She was pregnant. Robb was shot with crossbow bolts, walked wounded toward his dying wife, was then stabbed repeatedly by Roose Bolton. "The Lannisters send their regards," Roose told him. And outside, Grey Wind, Robb's direwolf, was killed in his pen. Catelyn Tully killed Walder Frey's young wife. Walder had her throat cut a moment later. The king in the north was dead. His host was destroyed. His queen and unborn child were dead. The northern cause collapsed. While the great game played out in the south, the world beyond the wall was changing. Jon Snow had gone north, with the Night's Watch almost at the beginning of everything, leaving Winterfell with his uncle Benjen, taking the Black, giving up his name and his future in the naive belief that the Night's Watch was still the great order it had once been. What he found was an organization hollowed out by centuries of peace. Men who were there because they had nowhere else to go. Old veterans, criminals, younger sons with no prospects. The wall was still real, the Watch still manned it, but the memory of what they were watching for had faded into something closer to superstition. Jon Snow had gone north with the Night's Watch. He had survived the wildling encounter. He had spent time with the free folk, the wildlings, long enough to understand that they were not monsters, but people who lived hard lives beyond the wall and who were fleeing something in the north, something cold. The White Walkers had returned. The Night's Watch saw it at the Fist of the First Men, a massacre of their forces, dead brothers raised as whites. The horror of the undead army made suddenly, viscerally real for men who had mostly kept watch against nothing for decades. The survivors staggered back to Craster's Keep and then to Castle Black, and the word they brought changed everything. But nobody in the South believed them. Nobody had time to believe them. The South was busy killing each other. Jon Snow rose through the ranks of the Night's Watch, was elected Lord Commander, tried to make the decisions he believed necessary, including letting the wildlings through the wall, understanding that every wildling who died north of the wall would simply be added to the White Walker army. This was not popular. The Watch had kept the wildlings out for 8,000 years. The idea of letting them through felt like betrayal. His brothers killed him for it, stabbed him in the yard, one by one, the same way Julius Caesar died, each man taking a part of the deed. And Jon Snow fell. He didn't stay dead. Melisandre was at Castle Black. She had followed Stannis north when Stannis marched his army to defend the Night's Watch against a massive wildling assault. A battle Jon Snow had helped win. A battle that had also killed Stannis' daughter when Stannis burned her as a sacrifice for magical favor, and then killed Stannis himself when his exhausted army was crushed by the Boltons on their march toward Winterfell. Melisandre had believed in Stannis as the chosen of her god. Stannis was dead. Her faith was shaken. But she had power, and she used it over Jon Snow's body. And he came back. He came back different, quieter, something essential having shifted in the experience of death and return. But he came back. In Essos, across the narrow sea, the last Targaryen was growing into something the world hadn't expected. Daenerys Targaryen had spent her entire childhood in exile, moving from city to city, dependent on the charity of strangers, and the increasingly fragile certainty of her brother Viserys that their birthright was waiting for them if they could just find the means to reclaim it. Viserys was the keeper of the story, the one who told her what she was supposed to be, who reminded her of the dragons and the throne and the destiny that had been taken from them. He was also, in his own way, broken, a boy who had watched his world end and built his whole identity around the idea of getting it back. Daenerys had been sold by her brother Viserys to the Dothraki horse lord Khal Drogo, sold in exchange for a Dothraki army that Viserys believed would carry him back to Westeros and the throne. Viserys was delusional, unstable, consumed by his own sense of divine right. The Beggar King, they called him. The boy who had sold his sister's life for a crown of gold. He got his crown of gold in the end. Drogo poured molten gold on his head when Viserys threatened Daenerys once too often, and Daenerys watched without tears. She had been transforming. The Khaleesi, the wife of the Khal, had been expected to be a passive possession, a foreign girl traded for political advantage. Instead, she learned the Dothraki way, rode hard, ate the heart of a stallion in the ritual, earned respect. Drogo loved her, in the rough and genuine way of a man who had never met anyone quite like her. Then Drogo was wounded, a small wound that should have healed. Daenerys, against all Dothraki custom, allowed a Maegi, a witch, to treat him. The witch had her own reasons. Drogo's wound became infected, became fatal, and in a final act of sacrifice and magic that cost Daenerys her unborn son, the witch kept Drogo in a vegetative state rather than life. Daenerys smothered him with a pillow. She walked into his funeral pyre. She should have burned. Instead, the 3 dragon eggs she'd been given as a wedding gift hatched. Drogon, Rhaegal, Viserion, born in fire like their ancestors, like the first dragons from the volcanic mountains of old Valyria. Small as kittens at first, growing slowly and then fast. Daenerys crossed Essos with a small Dothraki khalasar that had stayed loyal after Drogo's death, accumulated the Unsullied in Astapor, buying them and then setting them free, using them as an army of the free rather than the enslaved, and began moving through the slaver cities of Slaver's Bay, Astapor, Yunkai, Meereen, freeing slaves wherever she went, breaking the economic foundations of a culture built on human bondage, watching the consequences ripple outward in ways she hadn't always anticipated. She was learning to rule. It was harder than she expected. Freeing people from slavery does not automatically create a stable society. Meereen became her test case, a city she held for years, working through the problems of governance, of opposition, of the former masters who fought her every reform, of the former slaves who wanted more than she could give. Her dragons grew, and as they grew, the problem of controlling them grew with them. The pieces were moving toward each other across an enormous board. Tyrion Lannister, accused of his nephew Joffrey's murder at the Purple Wedding. Joffrey had been poisoned at his own wedding feast, choked to death in front of half the court by a poison in his wine, had killed his own father and fled to Essos. Tywin Lannister, the most formidable political mind of his generation, shot by his own son's crossbow bolt while sitting on his privy. The Lannister dynasty's great architect, dead on a toilet. There is a horrible justice in how Tywin died that the story earns. He had spent Tyrion's entire life treating him as a weapon to be aimed rather than a son to be loved. He had used Tyrion's mind, benefited from Tyrion's brilliance, deployed Tyrion's political and logistical genius at every point of the story where it mattered most, and then blamed him publicly, privately, in every possible way, for the crime of being born wrong, for being short and ugly and a dwarf, for reminding Tywin of everything he considered weakness. Tywin was powerful because he was pitiless. He died because eventually that pitilessness ran out of people to absorb it and turned back on him. Tyrion arrived in Essos and eventually found Daenerys in Meereen and offered her what she needed most: a political mind capable of navigating Westerosi complexity, a person who understood the houses and their loyalties and their weaknesses. In exchange, he wanted what Tyrion always wanted under everything: to matter, to be valued. to be part of something larger than his own survival. Sam Tarly was at the Citadel in Old Town, working on becoming a Maester, reading everything he could find about the White Walkers and the Long Night. He found records, he found history, he found the information about dragon glass, obsidian, and how it killed White Walkers. He found the information about Rhaegar's secret marriage. Bran Stark, beyond the wall, had found the three-eyed raven, an ancient figure, barely human anymore, grown into the roots of a weirwood tree and seeing all of time and space at once. Bran had the green sight. He had the ability to see through the past, to inhabit it, to watch events that had happened thousands of years ago. He learned the truth about Jon Snow. He learned about the Long Night. He learned about the enemy that was coming, and the enemy was coming. The Night King, the first White Walker, the man the children of the forest had made in their moment of desperate creativity thousands of years ago, was leading his army south. He had taken a dragon. Viserion, killed north of the wall by the Night King's ice spear, raised from the dead as an ice dragon, capable of breathing cold blue fire that destroyed anything it touched. The wall fell. Eastwatch by the sea crumbled under Viserion's fire. The army of the dead marched south. Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen had found each other at Dragonstone. Their meeting was charged with the difficulty of two people who were both absolutely certain of their own rightness. Jon needed her dragons and her armies for the war against the dead. Daenerys needed Westeros and its allegiance to make her dreams of her family's returned kingdom real. Neither was wrong. Neither fully understood the other's perspective yet. They went north together to capture a White, to bring proof of the army of the dead south, to show Cersei Lannister, who still sat in King's Landing, watching the other players exhaust themselves. Beyond the wall, things went wrong. Jon's small party was surrounded on a frozen lake. Daenerys flew north with her dragons to save them. The Night King killed Viserion. And something else happened on that frozen lake. Jon Snow nearly died. Daenerys stayed until the last moment, waiting for him. When he finally made it back, half frozen, she looked at him in a way that no one had looked at her in a long time. They fell in love. It was inconvenient and complicated and real. What they didn't know yet, what Bran was trying to tell them, and Sam had confirmed in the records, was that they were related. Jon Snow was not Ned Stark's bastard. He was Aegon Targaryen, the legitimate son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. Born at the Tower of Joy, smuggled north by Ned's love for his dying sister, Jon Snow was the heir to the Iron Throne. Daenerys' claim, which she had built her entire identity around, which she had crossed continents for, which she had freed cities for, it came second to his. The Great War was not what anyone expected, and it shouldn't have been. The Long Night of 8,000 years ago was the template, and nobody alive had actually read the template clearly enough. The records were fragments. The Maesters in Old Town had spent generations quietly reclassifying the White Walkers as myth, as folklore, as the kind of story that frightened children and explained bad weather. The very success of the Night's Watch, thousands of years of the wall holding, of the darkness staying north, had made the darkness unreal. That's worth sitting with. The Night's Watch had done its job so completely and for so long that the thing it was protecting against had become a fairy tale. 8,000 years of vigilance, and the reward for that vigilance was to be not believed. The living gathered at Winterfell. Every force that could be mustered. The Northerners, the Wildlings, the Unsullied, the Dothraki, the Dragons. Against them, the full army of the dead. The Dothraki charged first in the darkness, their araks alight with fire from Melisandre. The darkness swallowed them. Almost all of them died in minutes. The battle was desperate, ugly, brutal. The dead kept rising where they fell. The unsullied were overwhelmed. The dragons fought the dead dragon in the sky. The crypts of Winterfell, where the non-combatants had been sheltered, were not safe. The Night King raised the ancient dead, even in the crypts. And in the end, it was not Jon Snow who ended it. It was Arya Stark. Arya had spent years training to become something formidable. She had been to Braavos and the House of Black and White, trained in the arts of the faceless men, learned to move silently and strike precisely and wear the faces of the dead. She had come home to Winterfell, carrying a Valyrian steel dagger, the same dagger that had been used in an attempt on Bran's life years ago, now hers, now used for something the story had been building toward without fully revealing. She came out of the darkness in the Godswood, leapt for the Night King's throat, dropped the dagger from one hand to the other when he caught her wrist, and drove it into him. The Night King shattered. His generals shattered. Every white in the battle collapsed. The long night ended in a single moment, in the same Godswood where the children of the forest had once made the thing that nearly destroyed everything. Then came the last act, and it was the hardest one. Cersei Lannister had not fought in the Great War. She had promised her armies and then kept them watching from King's Landing, letting everyone else's strength deplete. She was pregnant again, by Jaime, always by Jaime, and she sat in the Red Keep, surrounded by the Golden Company and Euron Greyjoy's fleet and the scorpion weapons that had been built to kill dragons. Daenerys flew south with what was left of her forces. She was diminished. The Great War had cost her enormously. One dragon dead beyond the wall. Her closest advisors killed or scattered. And the knowledge of Jon's true identity had done something to her, had introduced a fracture in the certainty that had carried her across the world. Over Dragonstone, Rhaegal was killed, shot from the sky by Euron Greyjoy's enormous scorpion crossbows on his fleet. 3 bolts in rapid succession, the dragon falling into the sea. Daenerys had lost 2 of her 3 children. Then they took Missandei, her friend, her translator, her companion from the days in Essos. Cersei had her executed on the walls of King's Landing, while Daenerys watched from below. Something cracked in Daenerys. Some final thing. She flew on Drogon to King's Landing. The Iron Fleet burned, the gates burned, the Golden Company was destroyed. The city's defenses crumbled fast. Cersei's walls fell faster than anyone had expected. The bells rang. The bells, the signal of surrender. The city yielding, the moment when the battle should have stopped. Daenerys did not stop. She burned King's Landing. Not the defenses, not the soldiers still fighting. The city, the streets, the buildings, the people. Thousands of civilians who had no part in any of this, who had survived the long night and the wars and everything else, burned in the streets as Drogon flew back and forth overhead. Jon Snow watched from the ground in horror. Arya rode through the burning streets, trying to get out and survive, watching people die who she could not save. And Daenerys landed in the ash and the ruin and looked at what she had done with the expression of someone who had decided that the world needed to be rebuilt from the foundation. Tyrion was arrested. He had freed Jaime, who had gone to try to get Cersei out of the city. Jaime and Cersei died together under the Red Keep as it collapsed, not killed by dragons or armies, just by the collapse of the thing they had spent their lives protecting. Tyrion stood in the ruins and wept. Jon went to Daenerys in the throne room, the Iron Throne behind her. the only thing left standing in the burned ruins of the Red Keep. He loved her. He could see what she had done. He could see where this ended if she continued. He told her he loved her. She told him that the world she was building was the only way. He kissed her, and he killed her. Drogon melted the Iron Throne. The dragon seemed to understand, or seemed, in his grief, to direct his fire at the thing that had cost him his mother, the symbol of the game that had consumed so many lives. And he flew away east with Daenerys' body to wherever dragons grieve. The aftermath was an ending that felt earned, if not triumphant. The great lords of Westeros gathered in the ruins of King's Landing to decide what came next. Tyrion, prisoner, made the case that they needed a king, and that the best way to choose a king was not by birth, but by story. By who had the best story, the most compelling claim to be trusted with power. He nominated Bran Stark, Bran the Broken, the boy who had fallen from a tower and been changed forever, who had crossed the wall and learned to see all of time, who had come back with the weight of everything in his eyes and a quiet that was almost beyond human. He was not a warrior. He could not ride a horse or father children. He could not be the kind of king anyone had imagined. But he knew things. He remembered everything. He saw what was coming. And more than that, the story of how he had become what he was seemed to mean something. He had given up everything, suffered everything, to be a vessel for memory and truth. That was what a king should be. They voted. Most of the great lords agreed. Sansa extracted independence for the North. The North would have its own king or queen, separate from the Six Kingdoms. Sansa herself would rule it. She sat her father's chair and wore her family's crown and became what she had been shaped to be, not through a single heroic act, but through surviving and learning and becoming wiser than anyone who had hurt her. Arya sailed west. No one knew what was west of Westeros. The maps ended, the waters were said to be uncharted. The sailors who had tried to find the edge of the world had not returned. Arya had faced death and decided she didn't fear it. She had killed the Night King. She had survived King's Landing burning around her. She turned the prow of her ship toward the unknown and went. There is something right about Arya's ending that takes a moment to settle in. She spent the whole story trying to become something. Trying to become a faceless man, trying to become a killer, trying to become whatever shape would make her safe and powerful in a world that had taken everything from her. And the faceless men told her, correctly, that she was not no one. She was Arya Stark. She couldn't give that up even when she tried. She couldn't dissolve herself into their philosophy of non-self. And the story vindicated her refusal. Being Arya Stark, specifically, exactly, stubbornly Arya Stark, was what killed the Night King. Someone with no self could not have made that choice in that moment. She sails west, carrying all of herself, the loss and the skills and the anger and the love, toward whatever is out there, if anything is out there, with the same quality she always had, the refusal to stop moving, to settle for the shape the world tried to put her in. Jon Snow was exiled beyond the wall. He had killed the queen. Whatever the political necessity, whatever the moral justification, he had killed her, and the Unsullied and the Dothraki demanded justice, and the compromise was banishment. He was sent back to the Night's Watch, or what remained of it. There was nothing left to watch for beyond the wall anymore, but the institution still existed, and it gave him somewhere to go. Except Jon didn't stay at Castle Black. He went further north with the Free Folk, with Tormund, and the Wildlings who had become his people, as much as any other. Into the real north, beyond the wall, into the wilderness, into the places where nobody ruled and nobody watched, and the seasons came as they came. The last thing we see of him is the wilderness opening up, the trees growing green and alive, spring arriving in the land beyond the wall, something like peace. And here is where it helps to step back and hold the whole shape of it at once. From the first White Walker made by the Children of the Forest, to the last one shattered by Arya Stark's blade, 8,000 years. From Aegon's landing with 3 dragons and 1,500 men, to Drogon melting the Iron Throne, 300 years. From Eddard Stark riding south to serve a friend, to Jon Snow walking north into the wilderness. 8 years. The story has a shape that only becomes visible at this distance. Power corrupts in ways that are almost mechanical, not because the people who seek it are uniquely evil, but because the structures that hold power make certain kinds of choices inevitable. Aerys was not born mad. Robert was not born lazy. Daenerys was not born to burn cities. They were people who were placed in impossible positions and broke in the directions their personalities had always been bent. Here's what nobody talks about when they assess this story. The tragedy isn't that the wrong people won. It's that winning itself was always the problem. Every person who wanted the throne wanted it for reasons that made complete sense to them. Cersei wanted safety for her children in a world that threatened them from every direction. Stannis wanted order, legitimacy, the correct application of the law he had devoted his life to. Daenerys wanted to end the structures that had oppressed and traded in human lives for centuries. Robb wanted justice for his murdered father. Even Joffrey, in his twisted way, was simply exercising the absolute power that everyone around him had spent his entire life telling him was his birthright. The problem was not the people. The problem was the throne. The characters who survived with their humanity intact are the ones who, at some point, stopped trying to win and started trying to be right. Tyrion, Sansa, Arya, Jon, Brienne, Sam. None of them came out unscarred. All of them came out as something better than they started. There is something worth sitting with about Sansa Stark in particular. She arrived in King's Landing as a girl who had been taught that life was a song, that if you were good and pretty and gracious, things would work out. The world taught her very quickly and very brutally that songs were lies, but it didn't make her cruel. It made her careful, patient, observant. She learned from every person who hurt her without becoming them. She learned from Cersei's ruthlessness without losing her compassion. She learned from Littlefinger's manipulation without losing her honesty. She sat her father's chair in Winterfell at the end, and she was the most fully formed person in the room, the one who had paid the highest price for her education and used it the most wisely. The tragedy at the heart of the story is not that bad people destroyed good things. It's that good people, trying to protect what they loved, kept making the choices that destroyed them. Ned Stark was honest when the world required flexibility. Robb Stark was honorable when the world required ruthlessness. Jon Snow was loyal when the world required him to choose. And Daenerys Targaryen was certain when the world required doubt. The Iron Throne is gone now, melted down. The thing that was worth killing for, that families destroyed themselves over for 300 years, for which thousands and thousands and thousands of people died, gone. Because when a dragon looks at the throne that cost its mother's life, it turns out the throne has no answer. Bran Stark rules the Six Kingdoms with the weight of all of history in his eyes, and a quiet that nobody quite knows what to do with. He sees everything. Whether that makes him wise or simply old in a way that is beyond human is something the story leaves open. Perhaps those are the same thing. Somewhere north of the wall, in the green that is coming back to the wild places, Jon Snow walks. He is free. Whatever his name really is. Jon, Aegon, the blood of the dragon, the son of ice and fire. He is free of all of it. The throne, the war, the claim, the burden. He walks into the wilderness and the story lets him go. The wheel, after everything, did not break. It transformed. It became something new, or something old, or something so changed that the old metaphor doesn't apply anymore. The story of Westeros is not a story about the powerful getting what they deserve. It's a story about what the powerful cost everyone else. And the everyone else, the small folk, the survivors, the people who will plant their fields and raise their children in the ruins, they continue. They always continue. That is the quietest and most important thing in the whole long story. They continue. The North remembers. The old gods still watch from their carved weirwood faces. The wall stands, damaged but standing. Somewhere in the deep wilderness beyond it, the cold waits. Not malevolently, not consciously, just as winter always waits. As it has always waited. As it will always wait. Winter is coming is not a threat. It's a fact. It's the oldest fact in Westeros, carved into the stones of Winterfell, and the memory of every family that survived the long night, and swore to themselves they would never forget what surviving it cost. The Starks remembered for 8,000 years. That's the thing about House Stark that gets overlooked in all the tragedy of their story. They lost people. They lost wars. They were scattered and broken and reduced again and again. But they remembered. The memory survived. And in the end, it was the thing that memory had preserved, the knowledge of what the enemy was and how to face it, that gave the world a chance. That matters. It might be the most important thing. Sleep well, the watch is over.